You're here with Dennis Hopper's The Last Movie. What is your relationship with this film, and what is its importance to you?
Well, the film was kind of unseeable for many years. Universal refused to distribute it, and Dennis had to sort of struggle to get the rights back. Eventually, they split the film in two, and they made Dennis's version, and Universal cut their own version, which is called Chinchero, which supposedly plays on television from time to time. Dennis showed me a VHS of The Last Movie in his house, and I was most impressed by this film. And over the years, people would get in touch with me, like Japanese distributors would get in touch with me and say, "Hey, what's going on with The Last Movie? Can we distribute it?" And I would pass these messages on to Dennis's attorney and that kind of thing. But it was a long time before the restoration finally occurred. So up until recently, the only way to see The Last Movie has been the one print that exists at the Academy in 35 in Los Angeles. But now there's this whole new kind of trajectory for The Last Movie with the DCP and the Blu-ray and the DVD. And so we'll see. I would say with luck, the film will find an audience, but we'll see.
It definitely takes time, but that's the exciting point. The part of it is that sense of rediscovery. And, I spoke about in previous interviews about, people talk about with art, do you want to find it immediately? And people say, you're late to the party and whatnot. And I love the fact that a piece of art can find you at the perfect moment for you. Do you have any thoughts on rediscovering? Because from what I know about your career is you're a rabid film watcher, and has there been things in your life that you have not discovered, or artists that you didn't realize hit you at a certain time in one life and then you really take to them at another point later in life?
Well, there's some filmmakers whose work is just kind of hard to see. I mean, there's a filmmaker called Francesco Rossi who made Salvatore Giuliano and a number of quite significant and important Italian films. The only one of these films pretty much that anybody's ever seen is Carmen, because it's got music and all this kind of stuff. But just coming across Rossi films from various obscure sources is constantly exciting and constantly interesting. I saw last week a film by Rossi called Uomini Contro, a film about the First World War, which just came out on Blu-ray on some small label. And I'd never seen it before, and it's extraordinary. And there's another film by Rossi, which is probably his best film, called The Mattei Affair, which you can only get as a bootleg. And so it's fascinating the way that sometimes it's a struggle, and sometimes Rossi died 3 or 4 years ago at the age of 90. And I still haven't seen all his films because they're so hard to find. And yet every time I find another one, whether it gets released on Blu-ray or whether it's on the black market or whatever, it's always so exciting,
Yeah, absolutely. And there's this idea, from what I know about Hopper's work, that society made me a criminal. And this embattled figure, can go from punk rock to westerns, which has traveled from across from your work. What makes this character so ripe for thematic art in cinema?
Well, it's interesting that you quote that line of his, society made me a criminal, whatever it is he says, because Dennis was kind of involved both in editing The Last Movie and being in almost like the first reality TV show, because he let these filmmakers, Lawrence Schiller and L.M. Kit Carson, into his house and let them follow him around and film him constantly and set up things, like an all-girl be-in, and that resulted in a film called An American Dreamer, about Dennis when he was living in Taos, editing The Last Movie, kind of acting in a way that was really going to annoy both rednecks and the religious Catholic community of Taos and the Hollywood studio executives simultaneously, And it's a very interesting and very entertaining film. But in a way, it's also an exemplary lesson in why filmmakers shouldn't allow documentarians to follow them around, because in a way, then it's rather like, you know, The Burden of Dreams?
Yeah.
And how that overshadowed Fitzcarraldo. And in a way, I think that partially because the last movie hasn't been available, you know, I think that to a certain extent, the vision of Dennis that we get as this rather kind of self-indulgent, kind of almost pratty guy, you know, in Taos, undercuts what a good film he was making. And especially interesting in the sense that during the editing, the film changed entirely from being a linear, straightforward narrative to this fractured, broken up, I won't tell you too much about it because you haven't seen it, but a very fractured narrative. And you can really see the influence of Dennis's friend, Bruce Conner, and perhaps also the influence of Jodorowsky, who stayed with him in Taos while they were editing. So it's an interesting process, how the last movie got to what it is today. Because I believe at the beginning of the process, and certainly in Stuart Stern's script, it was originally a much more linear and comprehensible narrative. And what we're going to see tonight is something quite different.
Well, I saw something in Film Comment that said that you were talking about how Hopper got the Citizen Kane deal.
What is the Citizen Kane deal?
Well, aside from that, it's getting full creative control, final cut, all the budget you need.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Dennis was completely screwed by Universal. He was screwed in a variety of ways. He had just made Easy Rider. Easy Rider was made for $450,000 and grossed like $60 million at the box office for Columbia. Take as a corollary another director of Dennis's generation, an English guy called Mike Sarn. Mike Sarn had made, at the same year as Easy Rider, had made a film called, I can't remember the title of it, but it was a kind of a sexy film and got him a certain degree of recognition. And so 20th Century Fox gave him $5 million to make his second film, Myra Breckenridge. Dennis's first film was a massive success, hugely popular worldwide, made a ton of money for Columbia. Dennis, for his second feature, got $850,000. Yes, he got creative control up to a point, but if the budget exceeded $1 million, Dennis not only lost the picture, but lost his financial stake in it. So he was totally screwed. Because Stuart Stern and Dennis had come up with a really ambitious screenplay, which involved licensing clips from The Treasure of Sierra Madre, from John Wayne movies. It was a very ambitious project, and they didn't have the money for it. They just couldn't afford to make the film that Stuart had written because Universal only gave them a comparative pittance. And so far from having a large budget or a long shooting schedule, Dennis was under incredible creative constraints. And I think it's remarkable that he actually kept control of the picture, didn't lose it to Universal, didn't go over budget, didn't go over the shooting schedule. He was very late delivering the picture, but that was his contractual right. So it's interesting, but the myth that Dennis had this fantastic budget, you know, and the support of the studio is completely untrue because the studio was out to get him from the get-go, you know.
Wow, I mean, you know, I couldn't imagine keeping a mood on set and setting a tone with all of this turmoil coming down on you as a filmmaker and trying to get your vision.
And again, a torrent of journalists. First week of shooting, all these journalists show up from Hollywood and New York and stuff, and they're all writing stories about it, and they're all forming their opinion of how the movie's going to be, and partying, and then they go back to LA, and then a year later they see the film and it's not what they expected. You know? So again, you know, it's an object lesson. You know, don't imagine that the journalists who want to follow you around and be present on set while you're working, don't imagine that that's going to be a good thing.
Yeah, and it's exciting for us now to be able to talk about it 40-something years later.
Yeah.
And, you know, as a film lover, it really just breathes life into me. You know?
It's very exciting. It'd be nice to see it again, yeah.
It is. This is something very rare that you're bringing to Houston, and I thank you for that. It's really incredible.
Oh, well, we're
And-
lucky. I mean, we're lucky, that Arbalos, which is the company that's put it all together, and Dennis's daughter Marion have actually, made the effort to to go back to the original negative and put the film back together as best they can, and so it's very exciting.
Yeah, it really is. So to finish things up here, what work or what types of films inspire you today?
Things that take risks, and I don't mean take risks in the sense of épater la bourgeoisie, you know that expression, shock the bourgeoisie. I don't mean take risks like that. I mean films that actually really do take risks and do challenge the dominant paradigm. And I'm very impressed when people do that. I'm very impressed when people take risks, but not just risks to kind of like see how clever they are, or how much nudity or how much kind of whatever they can include in their film, but rather, if they can challenge the dominant cultural or political paradigm. I find that very interesting.
Alex Cox, thank you for your time.
Thank you.